G'day there and welcome back to another Fruits Basket review. After the previous episode's cliffhanger ending, we have another eventful episode to dissect and cry over. Now just before we get started, I will say I have read the manga and I'm aware of any relevant future plot points or details. However, for the purpose of these reviews, I like to only really talk about what the anime is presenting and not jump back and forth between manga and anime. This is mostly so I can keep the reviews streamlined and it allows anime-only fans to watch along and join in too. That being said though, let's get started on the episode. We start off the episode, just like the last few, picking back straight up from where we left off, with Kyo alone in the rain having run off after a spectacular bombshell devastation. Intentionally breaking Toru's heart, leaving Toru alone lamenting about how sad Kyo had seemed, and with Akito slowly approaching from the forest for an impending confrontation. Akito approaches Toru and asks her whether she was going to abandon her now, which makes Toru think of her mother and about her own fears that she's letting go of her mum by loving Kyo. It's clear that she's going to try to talk Akito down from her psychotic episode, and with Akito brandishing a knife, there's really not much hope for a happy resolution here. We cut away to find Yuki who's on the road looking for Kyo, where he runs into Shigure who seems surprised that he's out and about. Before they can really get into the reason behind this little meetup, we get a nice little dose of humour where Yuki notices that Shigure absolutely stinks. And Shigure claims that he was out drinking with his author friends, causing Yuki to scold him for being out all night when he's supposed to be their legal guardian. And I liked this little moment. There hasn't really been much humour or lightheartedness in the past couple of episodes, as obviously the show's building to an emotional climax and is dealing with a lot of traumatic subject matter. It wouldn't really make much sense to have silly jokes peppered in the middle of that, but here it works because the episode hasn't really had much time to build up that drama. Fruits Basket is renowned for its heartfelt and deep moments, but just as much for its quips and lighthearted moments too. I also enjoyed the little acknowledgement that of all the non-abusive Somas, Shigure is probably the worst choice to be a legal guardian for a bunch of teenagers. Mostly considering he's a schemer, he uses people for his own manipulative plots, he's a bit of a creeper, and he also seems to enjoy being as negligent as possible. The guy screams immaturity and would most likely be the first in line to organise an underage party, alongside Ayame of course. He's like Uncle Iroh without an ounce of wisdom or parental abilities. And it's a miracle that everybody survived this long. Yuki then asks whether Shigure has seen Kyo before realising that he must have gone in the other direction, and mutters angrily about how dare Kyo make her cry. Protective son mode right there. It's nice to see that the bond between Yuki and Toru is still there and hasn't faded despite their minimal interactions on screen as of recently. We don't really see them interact all that much anymore because their storylines have kind of gone in opposite directions, but we can see that their bond is still as strong as ever and it sort of integrates Yuki back into the main story again, which is pretty nice. Back to Akito and Toru, Akito begins to goad her asking if she's happy that she won, that she's taken her place in the hearts of all the Zodiac members and made her into the outsider. That she's come in and destroyed everything in Akito's life and turned her into a villain. I find it kind of funny how delusional Akito is here though. Nobody would have tried to exclude her or abandon her if she just treated them with kindness all along. Yeah, they still would have bonded with Toru, but they would have still loved Akito too. But I guess that's what happens when you abuse people for over a decade. And yes, we understand how Akito became this way, but it doesn't let her off the hook. Toru, of course, being the kind-hearted simpleton that she is, attempts to go and embrace Akito despite her wielding a knife. Because all she can think about is how lonely Akito must feel and wants to give her a classic Toru hug. But instead of getting a loving embrace, she gets stabbed in the arm. Because of course she does. This person's having a mental breakdown, has a weapon and wants to hurt you. What else was possibly going to happen here? Toru knows what Akito's done to the others, but completely ignores it. I mean, it's possible that she feels no sense of self-preservation after the love of her life abandoned her minutes before, but let's be real. She was probably just putting others ahead of herself again without another thought. Even at the possible cost of her own life. It's admirable, but I can't help but shake my head at this. Toru then begins to ponder Akito's life, realising that by being treated as if she's above everybody else, she'd been abandoned and excluded. She could never truly be part of the family of the Zodiac because of it. Toru explains this to Akito, who drops the knife, and wails on her instead with some pretty heavy slaps, saying that she'll never win her over. And I'll say this, Toru is a tough cookie. She gets pretty battered here, but she just takes it all on the chin and tries to help this person. I guess some of her mum's toughness rubbed off on her. Toru then says that she's the same as Akito, that she wished for those eternal bonds and unchanging feelings, referencing her desire to always hold her mother's memory close and love her the most out of everybody. But she's realised through falling in love with Kyo that you can't maintain those bonds and feelings forever and that everything's always changing. Nothing stands still forever. And then she tells Akito that she must have realised this too, and that's why she feels so lonely. And I swear, Toru just needs to become a professional philosopher with all her epiphanies and constant enlightenment. Of course, Akito realizes that she's right and screams that she doesn't want to be abandoned before running off into the woods. And Toru, being the kind person that she is, chases after her and begs for her to wait, with Akito breaking down, telling her that a world without bonds and the promise of eternity frightens her. I have to say that throughout this season, we've seen the constant unraveling of Akito, and whilst it might feel like a broken record at this point, I think overall it's been done pretty well. You can see the constant battle with fear that she's been fighting, and with the breaking of the curse looming over her, it makes her behaviour seem very natural and developed. They then stop atop the cliff that collapsed in Season 1, Episode 1 that completely destroyed Toru's tent. Very ominous foreshadowing for something that's probably not going to end well. So in case it wasn't obvious, it's pretty clear that we're seconds away from somebody going over that cliff. Toru then tells her that they should begin again together, with Toru introducing herself again and asking whether they can be friends. Akito initially refuses, telling her the minute she cries or complains, she'll stop liking her. And if this doesn't reveal how emotionally stunted Akito is, nothing will. That's the kind of stuff you say in first grade. Honestly, she's been failed by everybody. Her mother rejected her. Her father positioned her as far above everybody else. The maids grovelled at her feet. And the older Zodiac boys just enabled her instead of treating her as a child and trying to truly help her. No wonder she ended up like this. It genuinely makes you feel sorry for her despite all the terrible things she's done. Her true fear of being rejected is out in the open, and she just appears like Toru did. A lonely little girl wanting to be loved. Toru simply replies with, "I finally found you," acknowledging Akito's fears of rejection whilst promising that she would never reject her. Very heartwarming. The tears are flowing. What a good person. Seriously though, she is. The purity of this girl knows no bounds. Of course, Akito reaches for her, and then the cliff crumbles and Toru falls a very, very long way. And I know in the end she's going to be fine. Like, I know you can argue that this anime gets dark sometimes, but seriously, there's always a happy ending. But come on, this fall would kill you, or at least break your neck. Neck, or give her a traumatic brain injury. But I guarantee that none of that's going to happen. I'm just saying though, in reality, she'd be dead. Akito, understandably very shocked by this turn of events, immediately becomes distressed, screams, and runs for help, running into Shigure and Yuki back at the house where she begs them to help her as she doesn't know what to do. It's all very sad, seeing as Akito had made her first friend ever, only to watch them potentially die and have no idea how to help them. Shigure then asks her who fell from the cliff, with Akito confirming that it was Toru. Yuki then immediately runs off whilst calling for an ambulance, and we have a pretty interesting moment where Shigure asks if she pushed her. And he sounds so serious and kind of angry, like he's suppressing some inner rage. It kind of felt like if she'd said that yes, she'd pushed her, he would have totally given her up as a lost cause. I mean, he would have still loved her, but he'd give up trying to save her from herself. Toru, like the rest of the Somas, is like an Achilles heel for Shigure. You can say that his methods are questionable, but he does have a conscience. At least that's how it feels to me. She of course denies it, but you can tell that she understands why he asked. There's no air of judgment or accusing remarks as to why he would ask her that. You can tell that she's accepted her behaviour and faults at this point. She then confesses to stabbing Kurino and leaving him to die, while Shigure ushers her inside out of the rain. Shigure then calls up Hattori so we can get some exposition about whether Kurino is dead or not. And it would have been pretty crazy if he was actually just dead, but nope, he survived and he'll be fine. And as Shigure tells Hattori that Toru's had an accident, we see Kyo walk in and overhear. So that'll play into his guilt complex pretty nicely. Jesus, this guy cannot catch a break no matter what he does. Anyway, he runs off to find Toru while Shigure tries to comfort Akito. We then follow Kyo, who's desperately searching through the forest trying to find Toru, finally arriving at the place she fell with Yuki crouched over her. And after a tense look from Yuki, Kyo then goes and pulls a smooth brain move, trying to move somebody that has had neck or head trauma. Foolish Kyo. Surely his master would have taught him about first aid when they lived in the mountains. I mean, yes, he's overcome with grief and worry, but come on. It's a very, very dumb move. He then touches the back of her head and finds blood all over his hands, and this show is really going to try and tell me she's going to be fine with no repercussions on her quality of life. Come on now. But then again, this exact same thing happened to Rin except onto concrete, and she's totally fine, so yeah. They will do that. Obviously, I want it to be fine, but she's just very, very, very lucky, I guess. Kyo then starts crying, telling her this isn't what he wanted and that she needs to stay with him. Meanwhile, in Dreamland, Toru realizes that somebody's crying and wonders whether it was Akito, because that was the last person she actually saw crying before the accident. However, she realizes it's Kyo, and remembers that she needed to go after him and make sure he knows that she loves him, and that she doesn't want him to be sad or cry anymore. And I swear, she is the purest person on the show. This guy straight up shot down her love confession, she just shrugs it off and wants to help him. Then she wakes up and the first thing she says to Kyo is that it's all gonna be okay now. They proceed to then have a moment whilst Yuki awkwardly walks away. I can't imagine how weird it would be to be in Yuki's shoes, so I can't really blame him. And then Kyo kisses Toru, while she seems to be unconscious. I mean, yeah, you want to get all hyped because we've been rooting for this for so long, but can't completely be in the moment as it's kind of awkward to kiss someone who's unconscious. So yeah, time and a place, mate, but I guess she might die, so he wanted to shoot his shot. We then transition to the Soma General Hospital, which begs the question, did they build a hospital and set everything up so they could treat the Zodiac members without the secret getting out? Because if so, that is actually pretty smart. But I also imagine it would have been very expensive. How rich is this family? Absurdly rich, it seems to me. In the hospital sits Yuki, who for some reason is sitting in the dark in a waiting area. Why are the lights off in that room? People sit there at all hours, don't they? If the Somas went to such trouble to build a massive hospital, you'd think they'd have some serious business. It feels a little odd and like they just wanted to set the mood. As he sits, he finds himself approached by Toru's grandfather, who tells him he should go home and rest and not skip out on school to visit because it would make her worry about him. As Yuki goes to leave, her grandfather asks after Kyo and whether he knows about what's happened. And then we cut to a sad little montage of all the Zodiac members hearing about what's happened to Toru. And whilst all the little sequences were pretty sad, I'd say the worst one of all was seeing Rin sitting alone as if she's been crying. I mean, Toru's her only friend outside the Somas. Literally her only friend. And then she finds out she's in hospital and could have died. It's probably a lot to take in. We then transition to the hospital during the day and see Momiji making his way to visit Toru, only to come across Akito. Now, the last time these two spoke, he pretty much froze her out and did not think twice about it, so this feels like an awkward reunion to say the least. After he asks her whether she's there to visit Kurino or Toru, Akito responds that the pair are both idiots because they're not angry with her, because they forgave her so easily and let her off the hook. Of course, Momiji quite coldly informs her that those two idiots are the reason that she won't face any punishment for her actions. And I like the fact that he doesn't care one bit about being pleasant to her anymore. He's telling her how it is, and he doesn't really care if it hurts her feelings. Chad Momiji. And I guess it would be pretty hard for him not to get his hackles up around her, considering Toru's arguably the person he cares most about, and even though it wasn't her fault, it would be very easy to just pin the blame on her anyway. After Akito breaks down, however, he softens up, telling her that she should treasure them, and just because some people might think they're idiots, doesn't mean everybody else has to before giving her his cute little rabbit hanky. He then smiles at her and they have a cute little moment where it seems like he forgives her because he can see that she wants to change for the better. It feels like this is the beginning of someone extending their hand out as a possible new friend, despite him saying that he wasn't going to be bound to her anymore. It gives Akito hope that she'll be able to make friends without the curse in the future. Then he starts to recount the tale of the idiotic traveller, and thank goodness that is where they decided to cut away to a different scene. Thank God. The fake German accent gets annoying, and the first time they did the story, I began to hate my life because it took so long. The scene then cuts away to Shigure and Hattori discussing how they were impressed and surprised that Akito had gone alone to the hospital, with Hattori guessing that something had happened between her and Toru to prompt this shift. As Shigure reflects on what Akito had told him about how Toru helped her, we see Akito visit Toru in the hospital, and Hattori asks whether everything had gone according to Shigure's plan. He replies to this yes, but he feels bad about it. See, I knew he wasn't some heartless monster. He does have regrets about how people were hurt, although probably more regrets about Toru than Kurino considering his feelings on the two of them. And then we end the episode with Akito entering Toru's room with Toru welcoming her with open arms. And I wasn't expecting the episode to have such a heartwarming ending, or for Akito to change so abruptly, but it's finally over. The drama is over. Except for Kyo and the curse, of course, but I must admit I'm glad. There's still a few more episodes though, so I'm curious as to what else they're going to squeeze in. They have cut a bunch of story points, so I wonder if they'll tie them in somehow. We're getting closer and closer to the finale, and I'm not ready to say goodbye to this series. But I guess we'll have to wait and see. But those are just my thoughts, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think about the episode? Like it? Hate it? Make sure to leave a comment and let me know.